This is The Civil Fleet, the podcast focused on the activist-led refugee rescue and support missions across Fortress Europe, with me, Ben Coles. In today's episode, we speak with Francesca Cancellaro, a human rights lawyer who is currently defending 4 refugee rescuers on pretrial in Italy. The activists, Sascha, Darius, and Kathrin, were members of the Iuventa rescue ship, and together with their crewmates, they saved the lives of over 14,000 people between 2016 and 2017. While doing this, the Italian Secret Services, with the help of the far right, bugged their ship, tapped their phones, and eventually seized the Iuventa in 2017. 5 years later, the Italian prosecutor finally charged the Iuventa 4 with facilitating illegal immigration, and the pre-trial began in May last year. Francesca is going to update us on the pre-trial, walk us through the many irregularities that are prolonging it, such as the court's lack of translation for the defendants, and explain why the case is so important for the future of activist-led rescue missions. She's also going to tell us why the Iuventa crew are taking the Trapani prosecutor's office to court over the abandonment and destruction of their ship. Before we begin today's episode, there's a few things I'd like to say. We recorded this interview with Francesca on February the 27th, which was the day after at least 60 people died in a shipwreck off the coast of Italy. We mentioned that in this interview, but don't really go into it in any depth. It's taken me a while to upload this episode because of general life and work and stuff, but I've also been working on an exclusive story which has taken up quite a bit of my time, but should hopefully be finished very soon, so be on the lookout for that on silverfleet.com. Oh yeah, and we have some previous episodes with the Iuventa. We do give a little bit of background into the Iuventa and what happened to them in this episode, but if you want more details, then you should check out episode 2 with Sascha, who's one of the 4 on trial at the moment, or on pre-trial, and we also have episode 24 with Kathrin, which was, I think it was released a couple of days or the day before they had to go to court when the pre-trial began. So check those out if you want more details. I advise you do, because they're great people and it's really interesting what's happened to them. Also on YouTube somewhere, I'll see if I can dig it out and put it on the Silver Fleet's official YouTube page, which is new, which will be linked in the show notes, or you can find it on social media and stuff. I have an interview with I think his name's Hendrik, and also Darius, who's one of the 4, Hendrik's not. That goes into more detail too. So you can find all the stuff you could ever want about the Iuventa. What else do I have to say? Yes, the usual stuff. So I'd just like to remind you before we start that the Silver Fleet is not just a podcast. It's also a blog, a news blog with interviews, news stories, investigative stories, and that new exclusive story that I'm working on will be there soon. So if you want to know more, go to silverfleet.com. If you like what the Silver Fleet does, if you like the podcast or the news blog and you'd like to help us to platform the activists, refugees and lawyers and all sorts of people that we do, then you can help us out in a few different ways. You can share it out on social media, tell all your friends about the podcast, that kind of stuff. It's really nice. The episode with Abdi Haman went kind of viral on Twitter last time, so that's really nice to see. I'm glad a lot of people shared it around. I hope we've gained some new listeners. That's quite cool. You can help us to keep producing the podcast by donating the price of a coffee or a beer or a meal, maybe a monthly energy bill, or even a Ferrari if you like. You could donate a little bit of money to ko-fi.com/silverfleet. That's ko-fi.com/silverfleet. And you can donate a little bit of money, like those things I said earlier. We're not desperate for money or anything. I have a full-time job. I can run this thing by myself, but any help I could get towards running this, towards keeping this podcast going, would be greatly appreciated. Anyway, I think that is enough from me. Let's get on with the show. Francesca Cancellaro, have I said it right? Did I say it correctly?
Yes, Francesca Cancellaro, thank you.
Thank you very much for coming on the Civil Fleet podcast. You're a lawyer and you're working on the Iuventa case at the moment, which is currently happening in Italy. Before we start talking about that, before we get into the details of the Iuventa and the case, I wondered if we could start. Could you tell us about yourself? Give us some background information about yourself. I know you're a lawyer, but that's all I know.
Well, I have been a lawyer since 2013, but I started practicing in 2015 after obtaining a PhD that was about arbitrary detention of migrants at the border. And then I continued to work as a lawyer, researcher, and activist. And talking about my job, well, my cases deal with the criminal law and fundamental rights, especially the criminalization of solidarity with migrants, the criminalization of migrants themselves. I have been dealing with harm expert for years, but also with the abuse of pesticides, toxic substances, and more in general, the criminalization of political movements. And yes, I also represent victims of trafficking and violence. So it's more or less my background.
It sounds like really important work. And you mentioned you did some activism. What kind of activism were you involved in before?
Yes, I have been involved in many cases related to search and rescue operations, and I am honored to be a part of all of these legal teams, because of course we are trying to do the right thing for them and for whole civil society, because we know that we are defending in a way our democracy and our future. So it's an important role, and it's a privilege for me to be part of all of this. And I'm honored. Every time I repeat myself, I'm really honored to do so.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, it's such important work, and it's good that people like yourself are doing this and are defending, activists from being criminalized. It's such an important thing to do. So I wanted to speak to you. I wanted to get you on the podcast to give us a kind of an update on what's happening with the Iuventa trial. Could you kind of, I think people listening to this podcast will know a lot about the Iuventa, but maybe you could tell us a little bit about a background of them. And we know they rescued like 14,000 people. They rescued over that, and they rescued so many people. I don't know if you could give us kind of a background of what happened to them before we get into the case and what's happening there.
Yeah, even if everyone knows that now there is an obligation, there is a duty to rescue people at sea. The criminalization of activists has never stopped in recent years, especially in Italy. And the case of Iuventa is emblematic. After a long investigation that lasted more than 5 years, now four people are facing a sanction of up to 20 years imprisonment. And this case represents a kind of extreme attempt by the authorities to criminalize the sea rescue activity. Now the vessel of Iuventa is still seized since 2017. And this investigation was quite unique because there was a use of undercover agents, journalists and lawyers were tapped, and the major witness of the prosecution has already stated that he had a relationship with Mr. Salvini, who was the former Prime Minister of Interior, and he said he was hoping with this testimony to obtain a job and other rewards. So today, after a year of trial, I'm talking about the preliminary hearing, we are still at the very beginning, and it's a long process to obtain a fair trial, and that is why we are still here. But now we are getting to the heart of the issues. And as you, I don't know if you know, but preliminary hearings in Italy take place behind closed doors. But a group of human rights organizations such as Amnesty International, ECCHR, and so on, apply to monitor the proceedings, given the case's significant implications for the rights of people on the move and also for its potential impact on civil society. So now we have this precious presence in courtroom. And of course, we are dealing with many difficulties. And I don't know if we probably will talk about them, but it's a very complex case and a very complex trial. So
yeah, it's really crazy. Like we've done 2 episodes, I think, with activists that are on trial, that are on the trial. We have Kathrin, who we spoke about before we started recording, and I forgot the name of the other, Darius, and the other guy. What's the other person's name? I forgot.
Sascha, Dari, Uli, and Kathrin.
Yeah, that's right. And
4 actually. At
4.
the beginning, 10 people from the Iuventa crew were investigated, but at the end of the investigation, we discovered that only 4 of them were becoming defendants, and now only 4 of them are facing such a kind of sanction and are facing this trial.
Oh, I've just realized I made a mistake in the story I published yesterday. I said there was 3 and there's 4. I'll have to correct it after this interview.
No, they are 4 actually.
Yeah, and they were, you mentioned that their ship was bugged, right? They were being spied on by like the secret services. It's really crazy. They're accused. I always get this mixed up, and I get into trouble for mixing this up. Are they accused of human trafficking or of smuggling?
Okay, formally the offense is facilitating illegal immigration. It's an offense that you can find at Article 12 of the Consolidated Act on Immigration. Basically, the same provision used against smugglers and traffickers. So it's huge. That is why this accusation leads to such a kind of sanctions. And of course, we are facing an over-criminalization because of the structure of this offense, of this crime, which is another problem, because of course we are talking about the legal drafting of this provision, and this is strictly connected with the obligation of criminalization that comes from the facilitators package of 2002, and how national legislation brought all of this into the national one.
It sounds like, it's a huge case, right? And it's in Trapani, I think, right, in southern Italy,
yes.
where the cases happen.
Yes, in Trapani. Yeah.
And so I think they were under investigation. I think it was 2017 or 2018, and then they were waiting for a long time, right? And the trial, when did the pre-trial, when did that actually begin? Because I know it's been really protracted, right? It's been going on for a long time.
Yeah, I see. Sometimes it's hard to explain all the phases of the proceedings. It's complex also for us. So, the preliminary hearing started last year on May. And then, because of many prosecutors' mistakes, we had to wait for be properly notified by the hearing, for be properly questioned by the prosecution, and so on. That is why it's taking so long. So now, of course, the preliminary hearing will last many other hearings, because there are so many matters to discuss, and now we are at the preliminary phase of the preliminary hearing, so which is the very beginning of all of this. And the preliminary hearing is part of a trial, of course, but it's a kind of filter that so at the end of this, the judge of preliminary investigations will decide if the 4 Iuventa crew members will have a trial, the main trial, let's say, or not. We call it dibattimento, but it's a very specific word. So it's a complex proceeding.
Thanks for explaining that, because I've kind of, I don't have much of a law, but I have no law background. I know a little bit of, I know media law, but that's about it. So you have the pre-trial before the main trial, and I guess like is the pre-trial just deciding kind of what the terms are going to be and what their actual what they're standing on trial for. I think that's what you said, right? That's the point of the pre-trial, is it?
The offense is already clear because the prosecution has the duty to inform and to establish it before the beginning of the trial, so we know about our accusations. The thing is that the judge will decide if we deserve a trial or not, and we will, of course, we will be part of the trial, facing the very same accusation that we already know, but there's still the possibility for prosecutor to change accusations during the trial, within the trial. So it's a kind of open door for the prosecutor.
I see. And like you mentioned, there's been a lot of procedural errors, and that's one of the reasons why this has been protracted and why it's going on for such a long time. And I've seen one of the things that the Iuventa that they talk about on their social media channels is there's a problem with translation. So some of the charges haven't been translated against them. Is that correct? Or can you explain what's happening with the translation issue?
Yeah, you are right. The lack of translation and interpretation is a structural problem in the Italian legal system. And we want the situation, which of course impact all migrants, defendants too, to be solved, because it's a general problem. That's why we launched the no translation, no justice campaign, and you can find everything about it on the website of the Iuventa crew. But please consider that in the Iuventa case, only the 3% of the investigation file was translated, and the interpreters that were provided to us by the court for the interrogation, for the questioning, were absolutely inadequate. During these questioning, there was the first interpreter that was provided by the prosecution was a tourist guide, and then there was a former policeman twice. So that is why we object against all of this about the quality of interpretation. And the judge rejected our objection about the quality of the interpretation. He acknowledged that many mistakes were made, but was of the opinion that this could only be considered as irregularities, and that let's say the overall meaning of the translated parts were sufficient, was enough for general fairness. And the tricky thing is that with this decision, that the judge went completely against the opinion of the expert appointed by the court itself. And this expert examined the video material of the 3 questionnaires conducted by the prosecutor, and they had concluded that the interpreters provided by authority were unsuitable, as essential parts could not be understood by defendant, which is something that we cannot accept, of course, but for the tribunal was enough. And that is why we are still working on legal arguments to raise the issue. And we, as I said, we are only at the beginning, but of course, this gives the idea of the need to protect the fair trial rights within this, with such a kind of trial. And of course, this is a struggle that we made for the Iuventa crew, but it's more than this. It's a struggle for every foreigner defendant that has to face such a kind of sanctions before Italian courts without a fair assistance of an interpreter.
Yeah, it's a huge issue, and like, I mean, it's really terrible what's happening to the Iuventa guys, but they speak a European language. It's probably not that difficult to translate. I mean, eventually, it's not that difficult to translate it. But if you're like Somali, or if you're from Ethiopia, or or Pakistan or something, where the language is completely different, and it might be harder for them to get access to lawyers and this kind of thing. So, yeah, it's a huge issue. I have no idea if that's a similar issue in the UK. I don't know. I imagine it probably is.
It's an issue that should be taken more carefully, because sometimes the presence of an interpreter is considered enough, but it's not, because of course I see that it's quite difficult for us to assess the quality of interpretation, especially as you said, because sometimes defendants speak languages that are not that common in Europe, and we are not able to understand the content of the communication between the interpreter and defendant. So it's a huge problem, and I have the impression that only people that have resources and a good defense can raise such a kind of issue. So that is why I'm saying that it's fundamental to bring this campaign to the general public, because it's an issue that affects the whole system. And I have the impression that in the whole Europe, there are also problems like this. So it could be something that can be considered a common problem, let's say, and that has to be solved.
Yeah, it can really affect the fairness of a trial, right? If you don't understand what's you're being accused of exactly, or if what you're saying is not being translated correctly, it's quite scary about how the fairness of the law. You see it in movies sometimes, or in the TV, when people are forced to sign a document in another language. You're like, I'm not touching that. I don't know what it says. Yeah. So what other what would some of the other, like, are you able to talk about any of the other procedural errors that have been happening in the case, or any other big ones that you can speak of? Obviously, I don't want to ruin the trial or anything, but is there any of the other things that you can talk about?
No, there are some technical problems that are concerning the jurisdiction, the competence, but something that happened in last hearing that could be interesting, I think, is the intention of the Italian government to be part of the trial. And also in that case, we faced irregularities and problems. So probably this is another topic that could be discussed, because both the Interior Ministry and the Prime Minister have requested to become civil parties, as I mentioned. So they do so in order to be formally party within the trial, and to be in the position to ask for damages in the event of conviction of defendants, of course. And we submitted a request for their exclusion, stressing that their application was full of errors, both in form and in content, and therefore we thought that it was inadmissible. And some mistakes were so serious that we also had to say that there was a huge defamation against our defendants, because within the application there was included offenses for which defendants are not even charged at the moment, like belonging to a transnational crime organization and other offenses that were out of the whole case file. So this was so huge that led the state attorney to apologize within court, and entire passages were deleted from the application, because of course they were kind of sloppy work from the state, but it's it's something that says a lot about the quality of the work and the intention of with which the government wants to be part within the trial. However, last Saturday, the judge denied the request of the prime minister to be civil party, to become civil party against defendants, but accepted the request of the Ministry of the Interior. So in a way, the court recognized an abstract entitlement, a formal entitlement of the Ministry of Interior, but of course without any establishment of its role in the relationship to the facts. But what I find significant and is the impact that the decision of the government could produce, because of course I consider kind of act of intimidation. It's a political signal. It's clear. The government decided to be a party here and to claim for damages for something that was saving lives. The message, the political message is clear, and so I found that even if these mistakes are something that we can fight against within the courtroom, we know which is the political intention to use the trial against activists, and more in general trying to obtain a deterrence effect outside the courtroom too.
Yeah, it's that definitely seems like, and the intention is it. Sorry, this is maybe a stupid question, but is it normal for the government departments to get involved in a case, to be the the plaintiff? Is that normal for that? Does that happen regularly?
I wouldn't say normal, but it happens. Let's say that Ministry of Interior is part of the trial as a civil party. It's very rare the fact of the Presidenza del Consiglio dei Ministri, which is the Prime Minister office, decide to step into. And it is not a routine decision, but especially in this important trial, this very public trial, it's a signal. So, of course, we cannot consider it as a normal trial. Let's say the general impact is huge. So, of course, there is a precise intention, a political intention to be. So, even if in other cases you can find case law on this presence, of course, especially from the Minister of Interior side, we have to analyze it from a different perspective here.
Yeah, it's quite shocking that they're getting involved. I guess, like you said, I guess this trial and civil rescue in general in Italy has become part of like a political football or like a culture war type thing, I guess. Is the trial getting a lot of media attention in Italy? Like you said it's closed, so maybe, like, I guess journalists aren't getting in there, but is it drawing a lot of attention in Italy? What's happening here?
Yes, of course, and also because it is the hugest trial against NGOs. So that is why more than 20 defendants are involved. And 3 organizations too. So that is why and also because this was the first huge investigation against NGOs, and maybe also because all defendants are foreigners, and there is also a huge debate in the whole Europe, and also because of the presence of international observers, as we mentioned, and also the special rapporteur that intervenes, saying that this is something in which she will pay attention on, and so for many factors, this trial is a quite large space within media, but to be honest, is not enough. It's nothing compared to the bad narratives that we receive every single day here in Italy. So let's say that among NGOs trials, this is quite known, and there is a huge debate around it, but it's nothing compared to the day-by-day defamatory campaigns against NGOs. So if you consider the general public, I would say this is not enough to balance at least the whole defamation campaign against us.
Yeah, must be quite intense. Similar situations in the UK and I think across whole of Europe against, people that try to help people in distress at sea or wherever. I had another question and then it's gone from my brain. What was the question I was going to ask? Oh, you mentioned the special rapporteur. Is that the UN's special rapporteur for human rights? Is that, yeah.
Yes, she's Mary Lawlor. She is the rapporteur for human rights defenders, and she stand up and she published also her communication that was huge. But of course, this means a lot for us, and we thought that also for the government was a signal, but it wasn't enough for the moment, at least for the moment. So we'll see. And yes, talking about maybe other topics that are now important for us, there is a new criminal complaint that was filed, but this time was filed by the crew. So it's the funny thing is that we are defendants, but now at the same time we consider ourselves as victims, and because we filed 2 weeks, more or less 3 weeks ago, a complaint to the Trapani Prosecutor's office requesting an investigation into the abandonment and the destruction of the vessel Iuventa. So we argue that after almost 5 years in custody, the Iuventa is largely demolished and almost destroyed, and it is currently in danger of sinking. So it's it is also a real threat to the environment because the status of the vessel is awful at the moment, and so we know that there is a report which followed the technical inspection carried out at the end of October 2022. That was commissioned by the owners of the vessel and authorized by the Judge of Trapani, and it was absolutely clear in saying that no ordinary or extraordinary maintenance has been carried out in these years. And according to this report, there is a risk that essential parts of the ship are no longer functional, and some of them have been stolen. So we ask the court in Trapani to investigate in order to assess if there are liabilities in this custody, and we are sure that they are, because this is a case of negligence in custody, and which is a crime under the Italian law. So we expect an investigation which will assess if and who violated their duty to custody of the Iuventa.
Yeah, because they put out a press release a few days ago. Or I should just say it's February the 27th as we're recording this. So yeah, they put up a press release a few days ago and about the ship rotting inside, like you said, and there's videos of it. And if you look on your phone, I'll have links to anyone listening to the episode. I have links to the video and the press release about that. Yeah, it's really terrible that the ship is just left there to rot, and it feels like someone should have been looking after the boat, making sure that it's okay. My next question for you is, what's the next phase in the trial? When are they back? Are you able to talk about when they're back and how long the pre-trial you think is going to last?
Well, it's hard to make provisions and to predictions and to foresee. There are so many legal arguments that we will raise during the preliminary hearings. For example, we will raise a constitutional complaint, and it will be a kind of attempt to reshape using our trial, the rule in the field of the criminalization of solidarity at sea. So it will take some time, and we are looking forward to raise this constitutional complaint, because we work a lot on it, and we think that it is the right moment to start thinking about the reasons why there are trials like this, why the legal framework allows trial against activists that perform rescue at sea, while everyone knows that there is a duty to rescue, and there is a kind of obligation that comes from international conventions, but also from the Italian legal system. So it's something that has to be deepened, and we think that we have the good arguments to ask the judge to bring the case before the Constitutional Court. And what we want to try to do is to challenging the facilitating illegal entry provisions for everyone, with effect for everyone, because of course now we are defending the Iuventa crew, but we are conscious, we are aware that we are working for something bigger, and that is why we are sure that the preliminary hearing will last a lot, and also because of course there are so many things that we have to do, and we are, as I told you, as I mentioned, there are 20 defendants and 3 organizations involved, and that is why this is a kind of maxi processo against NGOs. It's a big trial, it's a huge trial that put together so many people and so many offenses and accusations. So it's quite normal that we are all working hard to make the protection of fundamental rights of defendants effective and real. That is why it is taking so long. We don't accept the fact that there is a sloppy jurisdiction against us.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, all they did was save people's lives, and it's what they were duty bound to do by international law, right? Like, you have to save lives if you're in a ship in the sea. I know you've got to go in a minute, but I wondered if you had my last question for you was I haven't had anyone on from Italy on the podcast for a long time, and it's like, it seems you've got this quite a far right government now in Italy, and yesterday, as we were recording, a lot of people drowned in the south of Italy yesterday. I don't know, how do you feel about the future of everything regarding the situation for people on the move, or migrants and refugees, etc. in Italy? How do you feel about it, and how do you think what's gonna happen in the future? It's a big question I like to ask everyone.
Yeah. Yeah, to be honest and in brief, the situation continues to be dramatic in my view. New laws, such as the so-called Piantedosi Decree, seek to limit and punish sea rescue activities, while Italy and Europe continue to watch the people die in the Mediterranean without intervening. Today we know, as you mentioned, the shipwreck of about 20 people off the Calabrian coast. And this dramatic episode forced the politicians and public authorities to consider what is happening, at least for a few days. And now is the time for false rhetoric, let's say, but also what is absolutely incredible is the fact that authorities also are blaming of migrants who decide to flee to seek safety in Europe. It's absolutely a paradox if you consider that at the same time in which Europe and Italy don't provide legal and safe means to flee from desperation, they also blame migrants and people on the move, more in general, for trying to save their lives. So it's a paradox, but it's real, and that is why I'm saying that the situation is dramatic. And if we consider that now, because of this new decree that provides a set of sanctions for the ships that carry out systematic rescue operation, I have no positive thoughts about the next future, to be honest. And so this decree is a part of new strategies to escape from the jurisdiction's rules and to the guarantees. And it's a new way to criminalize again NGOs' activities, also trying to overcome the relevant case law in this matter, such as the Rackete case and its principles. So I'm scared about it, to be honest. I really hope that public opinion will scandalize not only for 24 hours for this huge shipwrecks, which is of course a tragedy, but it's something that happens every day in the Mediterranean Sea. So we have to be aware and conscious that now we are scandalized, but what happens tomorrow and the day after tomorrow? And we are still criminalized people who are trying to save lives. This is the situation, and use it as a propaganda for political purposes. So this is the situation.
Yeah, it's really dark, right? What's happening. And like you said, I think every day there's got to be like shadow or dark, shipwrecks that happen in the Mediterranean that we don't know nothing about because there's no one there to see them. Well, Francesca, that was really great to talk to you. Thank you so much for updating us all on the Iuventa case and what's happening. I'm going to have links to everything you've talked about. You just mentioned Carola Rackete there. I think I'll have links about what's happened to her in the show notes if anyone wants to read more. Thank you so much for your time, Francesca. I hope all goes well. I hope you win this fight. I'm sure you will. Thank you so much for your time. It's been great having you up.
Thank you for having me here. Have a nice day.
Cheers, you too. Bye. Well, that was episode 36 of the Civil Fleet podcast. Thanks very much to Francesca Cancellaro for coming on and talking to us about the Iuventa. Thank you to Kathrin, also of the Iuventa, for putting me in touch with Francesca and helping get this interview sorted out. And thank you to you for listening. And we've been running this podcast for 2 years now, which is pretty cool. I probably should have done something special, but I didn't have anything planned. But there you go. I can have this episode. There you go. What do I need to talk about? We need to talk about the website. Go check out civilfleet.com for more stories and investigative stuff. I've got that exclusive story that I mentioned at the beginning of the episode coming out soon. So be sure to check that out. Check out the episodes with Kathrin, which I think is episode 24, and the episode with Sascha. Both of them are from the Iuventa. Go check them out. And if you like what we do and you want to help us keep doing it, and you'd like to give us some money to keep doing it, then you can go to ko-fi.com/civilfleet. That's ko-fi.com/civilfleet, and you can donate the price of a coffee or even a car or whatever to help us run this. I think that's all I have to say. I'm due to have an interview in the next few days, so I should have another episode out pretty soon. So look forward to that too. Anyway, cheers. See you later.